Dr. Victor Furnari is a child and adolescent psychiatrist who has devoted his career to caring for youth with mental illness. He is vice chair of child and adolescent psychiatry at Long Island Jewish Medical Center, including the Zucker Hillside Hospital and the Cohen Children's Medical Center in Queens, New York. He is also an investigator at the Institute of Behavioral Science at Northwell's Feinstein Institutes for Medical Research and a professor of psychiatry at the Donald and Barbara Zucker School of Medicine at Hofstra, Northwell. Dr. Oksana Haggerty is an educational and developmental psychologist who serves as a learning specialist and the dean of the Center for Student Success at Beacon College in Leesburg, Florida. Beacon College is a nonprofit liberal arts school and America's first accredited baccalaureate institution dedicated to educating neurodiverse students with learning disabilities, ADHD, dyslexia, and other learning differences. She specializes in academic support, cognitive abilities, learning disability interventions, and educational and developmental psychology. Dr. Sharon Celine is a licensed clinical psychologist with more than 30 years' experience with expertise in ADHD, anxiety, learning differences, and mental health challenges and their impact on school and family dynamics. She is the author of the book, What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew. She maintains a busy psychotherapy practice in Northampton, Massachusetts, working with children, teens, families, and adults with ADHD, mental health issues, and other challenges. She has spoken and conducted workshops nationally and internationally on ADHD and the adolescent brain. And we're going to begin our conversation with Dr. Furnari. How do the early signs of neurodivergence, such as ADHD and autism, often present differently in boys and girls?
Well, generally speaking, with boys, they exhibit more externalizing behaviors that include more hyperactivity and impulsivity, whereas girls with ADHD and or the autism spectrum may be more internalizing in their symptoms, which include more anxiety and depression.
All right, thank you. So Dr. Haggerty, what are some of the common misconceptions and biases that lead to misdiagnosis or underdiagnosis of neurodivergence in girls?
Well, I would say that for much of the 20th century, conditions like ADHD, attention deficit, and autism spectrum disorder were considered to be predominantly male disorders. And just like Dr. Furnari said, part of the reason was that boys were engaging in more hyperactive and impulsive behaviors. They were more disruptive. They created more problems in the classroom. And so they were easier identified. In the same realm, the girls were quiet. They were just daydreaming. They were underperforming. They were having trouble finishing tasks. So I would say that the problem with identification was that boys were able to tell us, because problem behavior is always communication. So boys were able to tell us louder that they're struggling compared to girls. And girls, unfortunately, were under-recognized, underdiagnosed, and they lacked services compared to boys.
All right, thank you, Dr. Haggerty. So Dr. Celine, can you tell me if there is a difference between how boys and girls express their emotions, boys and girls who are neurodivergent, that is?
Well, as Drs. Fornari and Haggerty have explained, the tendency is for boys to externalize their symptoms, and for girls to internalize their symptoms. So what that means emotionally is we see boys who will become angry, frustrated, possibly aggressive when they're feeling any kinds of distress or frustration, even sadness sometimes, or hurt. And we'll see girls often withdraw into themselves or demonstrate various symptoms of anxiety, including worry about things that are not related to the actual feelings that they're having. We'll also see more sadness and isolation, although we see that sometimes with boys, with distractibility, with gaming and other kinds of activities, so they're not actually having their feelings, which we will sometimes see with girls in terms of technology, social media, and things like that.
All right. So, Dr. Fornari, we know that with neurodivergence, a lot of times there are a lot of comorbidities like anxiety or depression that also come riding shotgun with a particular diagnosis. Are there more comorbidities that are prevalent in boys versus girls and vice versa?
Generally speaking, most neurodiverse youth experience anxiety even if they can't name it. They find themselves having more difficulty fitting in. They experience more bullying and more sense of isolation, so that the anxiety is very prevalent, although they may not know how to express feeling anxious, but they are anxious. And of course, adolescent girls, by the time neurodiverse young women enter adolescence, may experience more depression. Generally speaking, adolescent girls have higher rates of mood disorders than adolescent boys. But all neurodiverse kids often have very high rates of coexisting anxiety. Now, of course, because other disorders can also co-occur, including tic disorders, which can be a source of embarrassment with involuntary either motor or vocal tics, as well as other kinds of anxiety, whether it's obsessive compulsive disorder with strong repetitive motions. And because some of these youths also engage in some kinds of repetitive, stereotypic behaviors like flapping or clapping, they may be the source of attention that may cause more anxiety as well.
Okay. Dr. Haggerty, does executive functions like planning and time management manifest differently in boys and girls who are neurodivergent?
Well, that's a great question because while, say, attention deficit is considered to be an executive disorder leading to more impairment in executive functioning later in age, there is, despite some isolated studies and reportings, there aren't too many differences between how boys and girls or men and women with ADHD, for example, function in terms of their intelligence or executive functioning. What may be at play here, and maybe the assumption that girls are more impaired, is due to the same reason why neurotypical girls may be viewed as less successful, or even gifted women may be viewed as less successful. These are the assumptions about competence. These are gender roles, and thankfully they are becoming more fluid, but still maybe they're affecting what girls are doing in even the selection of courses in the middle school may lead to some kind of perceived impairment in executive functioning, because those courses may be less rigorous, and so they present less stimulation, challenge, and opportunities for development of the executive functioning skills later in life. So I would say that neuropsychological research does not support the difference in boys and girls. At the same time, what we see may be more social factors than really neuropsychological factors.
All right. So, Dr. Celine, let's take this into the school room here, the classroom setting. Do academic difficulties manifest differently between boys and girls who are neurodivergent?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I think the issue is more about the type of neurodivergence that a child lives with, rather than primarily their gender. So that's to me, that's the first issue that I would want to address, because people or kids with and children and teens with inattentive ADHD have different academic challenges than those with hyperactive impulsive ADHD. Both boys and girls with ADHD, regardless of the type, struggle with initiation, getting started on things, particularly things that aren't appealing to them. One of the hallmarks of ADHD, and one of of the most confusing aspects of ADHD is a consistently inconsistent motivation. So for things that they're interested in, there's no problem getting started. But if it's something that is more challenging, it's a little bit more difficult. I think some of the academic difficulties would have to also do with the issue of what we call sustained attention. So being able to stay focused on something that you're doing until it's completed. And this is difficult for a lot of neurodivergent kids who get distracted by, snow outside or a squirrel or somebody coughing in the classroom or sharpening their pencil. And so we want to assist educators to help their students return from distraction to the task at hand, particularly for girls who seem to have higher rates of inattentive ADHD. One of the challenges in the classroom, and this would be true for boys as well who have inattentive ADHD, but we see higher rates with girls, is what I call the drift. So people, drift to looking out the window or drift to thinking about lunch. And then when they return from that drift, there's a sense of confusion, feeling lost, not knowing what to do, or sometimes having your name called and feeling embarrassed and people are laughing at you. So we really want to assist our educators in helping kids come back when they're distracted in a way that feels less humiliating and more empowering.
Well, Dr. Celine, so I'm very fascinated by your term, the drift, and I'm wondering, are there strategies that parents can use at home to help their girls overcome this in school?
Well, I think one of the best strategies is noticing noticing that you do drift. That's often an unconscious process and not necessarily controllable, but having some strategies for yourself when you return from the drift, particularly for girls who may hide it or not want to draw attention to themselves or are not drawing attention to themselves in the classroom because of their more internalized patterns of behavior and emotion. And so I think it's helpful for parents to talk with their kids. I noticed that you quote unquote space out. One of my clients called it that she has a foggy brain. And how can we help you come up with a plan for when you return? What questions would you need to ask? What actions would you need to take that would assist you in reintegrating to what's happening right now?
All right, thank you. So Dr. Funari, as children move through school, and particularly as they move into middle school, there are going to be increasing pressures that they're going to face, social pressures that they face. Are there some that are particularly challenging for girls and boys who are neurodivergent, and in what ways might they be different for girls and boys?
So it's a very challenging issue for neurodivergent youth to deal with social pressures. They often aren't aware of social nuances, and it interferes with their capacity to develop friends and interpersonal relationships, often misinterpreting someone saying hello as they're being my friend. And it contributes to these youth being bullied and teased at much higher rates. And so many of these youth aren't even aware sometimes when they're being made fun of. And oftentimes, by the time they do realize it, other youth have really been quite mean and cruel. And unfortunately, it has contributed to many of youth who are neurodivergent to really struggle with feeling victimized and being bullied. And of course, today with social media, this has now been amplified, where many neurodivergent youth have been really bullied in social media. And so we really want to educate youth about recognizing and having to teach about understanding how you make a friend, what's nice, what's not nice. If someone is mean to you, don't continue the relationship. Oftentimes, neurodivergent kids will say, even though that person has been mean to me, they're the only person in the class that speaks to me. And so it's a real challenge because developing peer relations is such an important part of childhood and adolescence, and it's a source of major challenge for these youth.
All right, thank you, Doctor. So, Dr. Haggerty, I want to kind of extend what Dr. Fenari was just talking about, and while parents probably won't like this question, I'm going to ask you anyway. Are there some unique challenges that boys and girls who are neurodivergent might face when it comes to relationship building and dating?
I would say yes, and unique in a sense that just like they do not develop the necessary social skills, and reports show that almost 80% of students with attention deficits of adolescents with attention deficit do not have a reciprocated friend, 80%, which means that they do not develop the necessary experience to engage in more intimate relationships later on in life. It's especially true, unfortunately, for girls because girls with, say, impulsivity as part of their ADHD symptomology will display behaviors that are less socially acceptable for girls. And so they will be they will find themselves in situations that are, again, less socially acceptable, and they will be bullied more than maybe typical girls or boys with ADHD, because their behaviors will be considered absolutely unacceptable by the majority of people around them. So yes, I would say that due to a lack of social exposure and meaningful relationships earlier in their development, they struggle to develop meaningful relationships later on. And while both men and women with ADHD do struggle with marital dissatisfaction, and the rates are higher compared to typically developing individuals, an interesting finding for me was that although males with ADHD are often reported to express verbal violence and verbal aggression, their female partners without ADHD are less likely to report marital problems compared to male partners of spouses with ADHD. It probably goes to say that the ADHD in adulthood may require some kind of nurturing relationship, just like maybe in childhood too. But as they transition to adulthood, it becomes very, very important to have a partner, to have a friend, to have somebody who understands you and can care for you and accept you as you are. And this is not easily found, especially, as I said, especially for individuals who struggle to build those relationships or experience those relationships earlier in life.
All right, thank you. So, Dr. Celine, could you explain to us what masking is and whether boys and girls who think and learn differently might mask their symptoms differently?
It's a great question. So masking is an attempt to hide what's really going on. It's actually when you sort of figuratively put on a mask that you think is what other people want to see, or what is sort of what's cool or socially acceptable, and you kind of bury or hide your authentic self, and only share it with true friends, a few friends, maybe one friend you really trust, or you might show it with your family. And we see different types of masking between boys and girls. Boys will often see a sort of being the class clown, being very extroverted, super friendly, sometimes aggressive, in an attempt to kind of hide their own insecurities about being neurodivergent. There might be some bravado, a little bit of top dog behavior. With girls, the masking that we see is different. We also see that kind of hiding, like sort of attempting to show what will help other people like you in what you believe other people want to see, and what you think other people will enjoy about you, and you attempt to and also use camouflage techniques, blending with other people, dressing like other people, and in both cases, there's a real sense that I am not enough as I am. There's something deficient about me, and I don't want other people to see that. So I'm going to do what I can to not just hide it, but I'm going to try to do my best to blend in with what other people are doing. And of course, the risk of this is seen particularly in tweens and teens, in sort of substance use or joining bullying to become popular, and other choices that they're making for acceptance.
Thank you very much. So, Dr. Fornari, in listening to the conversation here, it seems to me that one of the strongest, most powerful tools that neurodivergent children will have here is developing strong advocacy skills. How can parents help them do just that, tailored to their gender identity?
Well, first of all, the most important thing parents can do is really learn to understand and appreciate their child's strengths and their challenges. Oftentimes, parents have a difficult time accepting that their youth may be neurodiverse or may have some atypical qualities. And I think parents need to be educated and informed. And the way that they can advocate best for their youth is by first understanding them and then trying to support a strength-based approach. So although each of us has strengths, each of us may also have our relative challenges. And so I encourage parents to really find out what their youth enjoy and what can be a strength. Oftentimes, music, playing an instrument, a particular sport. I know that for some neurodiverse youth, being part of a team can be challenging, but finding some sport that can be something that they can excel at, whether it's gymnastics or golf or running, so that they can really develop a strong sense of self-esteem by something that they have that they can excel at. I encourage parents to really support youth learning martial arts, which can really be very helpful for their self-esteem. And so having a variety of activities that youth can excel at can often really support their sense of self-esteem and allow them to try to manage their own social challenges in a way that allows them to feel good about themselves as they emerge as adolescents and then young adults.
Dr. Haggerty, are there any unique challenges that girls who think and learn differently experience as they transition to adulthood?
I would say yes. And if we go back to speaking about attention deficit, the whole idea that at some point you will grow out of your attention deficit, at some point it will become better. And I think this idea came from the fact that if there is anything in ADHD which can decline with time, it's the hyperactivity component. So while we see younger boys bouncing off the walls, we certainly do not see too many adults bouncing off the walls. So hyperactivity can kind of become less pronounced. And so some people may think that people outgrow their ADHD. While we know that hyperactivity is not something that girls mostly struggle with, if anything, they do struggle with hyperverbal behaviors. They do not act in a hyperactive way. They do talk a lot and random topics to random people. And so one of the things is that if we're talking about men and women or girls and boys transitioning into adulthood, we won't say that we may see boys becoming better because they're becoming less hyperactive, but the ADHD doesn't go away. They remain maybe impulsive, they remain inattentive. Girls will remain what they are, inattentive symptoms, impulsive symptoms, and hyperactive, hyperverbal behaviors will probably remain there. But a piece of advice that I could give to the families as we transition to adulthood, and again, neurodevelopmental disorders, learning and attention issues are lifelong conditions, and we probably won't ever outgrow them. At the same time, we can do a lot for executive functioning. We can do a lot, and one of my favorite definitions of executive functioning is self-regulation through self-awareness. It's very, very important to become aware of your own functioning, of your strengths and weaknesses, to become aware that as a woman with hyperactivity, as a woman with attention deficit, I may be more prone to have seasonal depressive disorder, or I may be more prone to eating disorders, or I may be more prone to stop enjoying rewarding activities. So knowing what are your strengths and weaknesses as you transition to adulthood is very, very important, because actually for executive function, you can, through this self-awareness, for understanding of your own self, you can develop better self-regulation. That will help you with your early childhood onset neurodevelopmental disorders.
All right, thank you, Dr. Haggerty. Well, we're going to close out our conversation, Dr. Celine, by going back to the classroom. I'm wondering if there are any specific steps that parents can take to make sure that their child's school is providing accommodations of support that's directly related to their neurodivergent child gender-specific needs.
Well, I'd like to go back and just sort of honor something that Dr. Fornari said, which was about taking a strength-based approach. A lot of times, school is the most difficult area of functioning for neurodivergent children and teens. And the focus is on their challenges and not their strengths. And so one of the things that we want to do is to improve collaboration between parents and school faculty, so that there is a focus on what a neurodivergent child does well, to grow that while simultaneously shoring up some of the challenges. I think specific steps that parents can take to ensure that their child is getting the support they need would be to make sure at the beginning of the school year to meet with a classroom teacher if a child is in elementary school, meet with a team if a child is in middle school, and certainly speak to the guidance counselor or the adjustment counselor if a child is in high school, as well as whoever the child's advisor is, to make sure that everybody is aware of the child's strengths and challenges. If there's been psychoeducational testing and recommendations, that those recommendations are being followed. If a child does not have a 504 accommodation or an individualized education plan, an IEP, you might want to, as a parent, talk with the school about that, to see if a child, if your child particularly, might need an evaluation, a psychoeducational assessment that would move them towards receiving these services. The main thing that's important for both girls and boys who are in school is that they're unique ways of learning are threaded into how they're being taught, and how information is being conveyed to them and what they're being asked to do. So, for example, you might have a child who is a creative guitar player, singer, songwriter. I had one of these, and for they had a fantastic AP history teacher in high school who gave them a pretty open assignment to do a creative project about, I think, Benjamin Franklin. And my child decided to write a song. Other people wrote a poem. Some people did a little fictional story. And so this allowed people to show other sides of who they are. And so working with schools to do that, I think, is really in the ballpark of what a parent can do, and it really helps the students.
All right, that's going to be the period on our conversation. Dr. Victor Fornari, Dr. Oksana Haggerty, and Dr. Sharon Celine, thanks for the knowledge.